Hello Cloudopian. In this session, we are going to learn AWS App2Container. App2Container is a command line tool that allows you to containerize legacy applications. How it works is we are going to analyze a legacy application and then create some kind of an artifact, pretty much a zip file. And then we are going to bring that zip file into a container instance and then containerize that and then deploy it on AWS. So in this tutorial, we will first take an example. In this case, we have a very simple application, .NET Nuke. It's a legacy .NET application running .NET Full Framework, running on Windows 2012. And the database backend is a SQL Server. In my case, I'm using SQL Server running on Amazon RDS. In your case, it can be any database backend. What we will do is we are going to extract this Windows application. Database will remain the same. We will run some App2Container command lines, do an inventory analysis where it will go through the IIS website, analyze the existing website, and then extract a file. We will create a zip file. This is an automatic process. Either put it into an S3 bucket, and then bring it into a Windows instance that has container support. If you have container support in the source machine, you can directly containerize it from there. But I take this example because it reflects the real world scenarios where you have legacy Windows application running on legacy Windows operating systems. You can directly copy the zip file into this container machine if you want through maybe an RDP connection. And then I'm going to run a few other commands that includes containerizing of the application and generating the artifacts that allows me to deploy this container into AWS. As part of this process, you can take the image that this generate. App2Container is a free tool. You can use the image that it generates to deploy it any other container environment. Maybe you want to deploy on premises or maybe in Azure. It's completely up to you. So once this image is generated, we will execute some extra commands to deploy AWS artifact that allows you to deploy it into Elastic Container Registry and then spin up a website on Elastic Container Service. You can also deploy it into Elastic Kubernetes if you want. But in this tutorial, I will show you how to do it on Elastic Container Service. So without ado, let's get started. I have a legacy .NET application running on Windows 2012. This is DNN running .NET Full Framework. As you can see, this is a .NET application. The first thing I did was installing App2Container. I went to App2Container website, download a file, and then ran it. That gives me access to App2Container command line interface. The first thing I need to do is to create an IAM user. This IAM user allows me to communicate with AWS to deploy some artifacts that I want to deploy into AWS. So give it programmatic access. For the IAM permission, if you are doing initial deployment, you can attach administrative access. So I attach the right permissions and then I create this user and I get the access key and the secret key. I also install AWS command line interface that allows me to create an IAM profile in my source machine. This allows me to create an IAM user, related access key and secret key using AWS command line interface. I log into command line as an administrator in the source machine. I'm then now going to create a profile called App2C profile. You can give it any name that you like, and then provide the access key and the secret key of the user I created a moment ago. This user has administrative permissions to AWS. For the region, I give the Singapore region. Select the region that you want to deploy this application. You can take the help file, just type in App2Container. As you can see, I already installed App2Container on this machine. I'm going to run a command called App2Container init that I use to point certain parameters. So that includes the current workspace. In this case, I'm going to use C my workspace. The profile I created a moment ago, and also an S3 bucket to put the artifact that I'm going to create. You can create an S3 bucket and use it here. I already created a one called my App2C bucket. I don't want to send any metrics to the AWS, and also I don't care about Docker Trust. In my source machine in the legacy Windows operating system, you can see that I have a IIS website running. There are in fact two websites. The one I'm going to containerize is this DNN website. So if you type App2Container inventory, it will show you the IIS website you have in this machine. So there are two websites. The next thing I'm going to do is to call App2Container analyze and then give the application ID, in this case IIS-DNN and the number. This will run this analysis for a few minutes, leave it running, and after the completion you will find some log files and some output similar to this. You can analyze the files that it generated. As you can see, it has some files, and one of those files is analysis.json. If you open that file, you will find that it has some sections that you can edit. And the more important one is that you can change the base container image that this will use when it containerizes. There are some sections that you cannot edit, so you cannot change those parameters. Usually, the default base image that this selects is good enough to run this application. The next thing I'm going to do is to call App2Container extract and then give the application ID that will create a zip file with all the artifacts of that website. That will include the configurations, the DLL, the SPX pages of that website. Let it run for some minutes. Extraction is completed. Let's now go and then copy this zip file into my destination, which is a Windows machine that I use as an intermediary to containerize this application. This is a Windows 2019 machine with container support. I paste the zip file I created a moment ago. Alternatively, you can first copy into an S3 bucket and then get it from there. This is an intermediary step. This machine is used just to create the container. So I have this zip file. Let's now use this zip file to create a container. I open command line as an administrator. Similar to previous steps, I'm going to configure my profile. In this case, it's App2C profile, give the access key and the secret key of the user and the region I want to deploy this. In this case, it's going to be Singapore region. I then type Docker images, so you can see that I already have the base image downloaded. This will speed up the containerization process. The next thing I'm going to do is to call App2Container init. Like before, I want to give my workspace directory. I'm also going to give my profile I created a moment ago in this destination, in this or the intermediary machine, and also the S3 bucket I created a moment ago. I don't want to send usage statistics. So now I'm going to call this App2Container containerize and then give the zip file as input archive. That's going to create some assets in your machine. As you can see, it has created some assets. You can go into this deployment JSON file to investigate. So it includes things like what is the container port that it's going to expose, how much CPU and memory it's going to allocate when it creates this container resources in AWS. So all these parameters you can change, so you can customize how these things going to get created inside AWS. You can enable EKS deployment. If you can see that create EKS artifact is set to false, That is because I'm only going to deploy ECS. So create ECS artifact is set to true. So this will create an ECS when I deploy. So if you type Docker images, you can see that IISDNN Docker image is already created. You can extract this image and deploy to any place that you like. Nothing prevents you deploying into other places than AWS. I'm going to create App2Container generate app deployment and give the application ID. This will create the artifacts in AWS. So as you can see, in this case, it generated an error. That is because I didn't have enough permissions in my user I created to deploy this application. So if you have any errors, you can always check it on this log file. So you can see that's unauthorized access. All what I did was I went to IAM user. As you can see, these permissions won't allow me the access to certain resources. So what I did was I just went there and then gave the administrative permissions. So now you have the administrative permissions. This is just a tweak, but you need to give only required permissions if it is a production environment. Now it deployed into AWS. So if you go into Elastic Container Service, you will see that under repositories, it created a repository to deploy the application. You can see that the container image has already been deployed. It also created the task definition. So this task definition is the definition of that contains content information. So that includes how much memory and CPU you are going to allocate for this. Now remember, this information came from my deployment JSON file. So if you go into the folder, you can see that it created the file here, right? Deployment file, and there you can see the amount of memory and CPU it allocated, and that's what's get reflected here. As you can see, it exports certain pods, configure the CloudWatch logs. So the task looks good. So next step is to create a cluster to run this container. I'm going to select EC2 Windows Networking. Next step, I'm going to give it a name. Let's call it my test cluster. It's going to be an on-demand instance. All looks good. Let's now select instance type. So let's select something like T2 X large. Number of instances 1, what's the image I want to select. In this case is 2019. I'm happy with that. The key pair, this is a key pair if you want to remote login into this container host. This is useful. As part of that generation, it already created a key pair. I select the VPC I want to deploy this and the subnets where this will run. So I select 2 public subnets because it's going to be a website so that I can connect into that. And also this is the testing phase, so I should be able to remote login if I have any issues during the testing. I assign some public IP address. This is completely up to you. I do this. This is because it's a test network. You can allow security groups, the content instance IAM role. So this allows the content instance to communicate with Elastic Content Registry and then download the images. All looks good. Create next. So you can see that it will provision this container cluster. The next step is to create a load balancer so that I can create a front end. So I create a load balancer, give it a name. This will be the load balancer that will face my application. It's going to be an internet facing load balancer. I give some listener pods, port 80, all looks good. Leave them all as default. Select my VPC that I want to deploy. The public subnets where my container cluster is running. So these are the subnets I'm going to deploy this load balancer. All looks good. Go to the next step, security groups, configure this one. I'm going to allow port 80. You can give a name for this. My security group seems good. Go to the next. I'm going to select a new target groups. This target group I'm going to delete soon after I created that because I will create this one when I create the service. So looks all good. Go to registry. You can select the ECS instance that is started. You can see it's prefixed with ECS instance. This is the instance of the cluster. You can select it as the target for the load balancer. Click close. Here you find under my load balancer the listeners. So this listener is something that I created as part of load balance creation. I'm going to delete it because I'm going to create it later. You can also delete the target group. This target group also I'm going to create as part of ECS service creation. So my cluster is working. If you go to EC2 instance, you can see that it's active. If you go to here, the instance is up and running. So if you go to now services, I'm going to create a new service, select it as EC2. The task definition is the version. You need to select the latest version. Service name, give it a service name. So let's call my DNN service because this is the website I'm going to run. Number of tasks is 1. Balance spread is good. And the next step. So here is where I'm going to point into the load balancer I created a moment ago. So select application load balancing, health grace period, put it something like 2 minutes. And then service role, create a new one. Load balancer name also, you can select the one you created a moment ago. Production listener port, create a new one, put the port 80. That's the one that I expose in my container. Target group also, you can leave it as create new. So health check place is all look good. Go to the next step. I don't want to auto scale, create the service. So this create the service to run my container. So my cluster is ready. There's one service. As you can see, the service is there. The desired count is 1. Pending count is 0, running count is 0, which means the container didn't start. So seems like there's a problem. All the problems you can find under events. That is because this ECS task execution role was not created. What actually happened was to simulate this error, I deleted that task role. So any errors you can find in this place. So to fix this issue, let's go there and then create this execution role, the same name that is saying that it's missing. So what I did was I go into the IAM section of the console, and then I'm going to create that role. Now, mind you, this is a task execution role, and that needs to be trust in ECS. So let's select ECS. You can see Elastic Container Service, and there's a one called Container Service Task. So this will have the right permissions to execute the task. So if you search for Elastic task execution role policy, that will have enough permission to execute this task. So give it a name, same name as that it is throwing the error, saying that this role is missing. So I created the role, and immediately after I created the role, you can see that if I go into Elastic Container Service and then select my cluster, go to the service I created, you will find that pending count now is 1 because it's now starting the container. Give it some time. You can see that the error is gone. One task has started. Give it some minutes to download the container and start the container instance. After a moment, this pending count will be 0 and then running count will be 1. So as you can see, there's a deployment happening behind the scene. Refresh for some time and then all of a sudden this running count will be 1. So the running count is now 1. You need to give a few minutes to start it. And then now let's go into the Elastic Load Balancer and then select the DNN's name to access the website. Now when I access the website, it can same time, you can see that it gave a timeout. This is because I haven't configured the security group of the Elastic Container Service EC2 instance that can communicate with the database. As of now, the website cannot communicate with the database. That's the problem. So let's now go into the ECS instance. So in this case, Elastic Container Service Test Cluster. Now this has a security group. This security group as of now does not allow access to the database that this website needs, which is running on Amazon RDS. So I go to the VPC and then check the VPC it's running is my due VPC. And the CIDR block is 10.0.0/16. Ideally, you should allow only the correct port and the database traffic only, but I'm just being lazy. So here you can see that I have my database instance running on the same VPC. So therefore, what I'm going to do is to allow all the VPC traffic within that VPC to my ECS cluster. So I go to the security groups of this EC2 instance and then set up the inbound rules, add the custom, all the TCP, all traffic. I'm going to allow all the traffic from that internal VPC. So that will give me access to the database. All looks good. And now when I refresh the website, you can see that after a while, it should come and then show that DNN website that I containerized a moment ago. This website is now running inside a container. As you can see, now it works perfectly fine.